Theater. This is a wonderful event organized by Natalie Munacho. Natalie from the co-op. Stand up. She came to me a little bit ago and said, we really want to do this disaster preparedness event. And it was something for me personally that I wanted to do here at the SeaView. And it was like, oh, I don't have to do it. Natalie's going to do it. This is fantastic, and I'll just support you. So thank you, and she did. So we've got a great lineup. I think this is really important, what she's doing and what this group of people have prepared for you today. And we are stronger together as an island. So I am excited about hearing all the information. I'm going to introduce the very first person who's going to do another slight introduction. And this person is Rick Hughes. And I just want to thank him for all of his public service that he does for us. And he is always there at the ready. And when I said we're going to do this, he said, great, let's do it, I'll come. The county will support it. This one will get behind it. And you're always there, and I really appreciate that for us. Thank you, Rick. Rick Hughes, everyone. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. It was one more logistical thing. Do you mind? I'm sorry. That was such a great moment, and I just squished it. Wait, stay there. But this, I looked at Natalie, and she looked at me, and she said, her eyes said, you forgot to tell them about the sign-up sheet. We want to keep track of you, and we want to give you, no, not him. No, we want you to be able to have access to the information and the links that will be provided here this evening. We will not track you, I promise. So Natalie, please sign up so that you can get the information and the links that you get some of these handouts. And now, that wonderful introduction, Mr. Rick Hughes.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. Well, this is such a great crowd, and I have been told that I have less than 2 minutes to say something, which you all know I can't do. So we'll try to make 1 minute and 40 seconds. But thank you all for being here. It's such a great, resilient crowd to come from Orcas Island. This is such an important topic for me. As a community or a county consisting entirely of islands, we have to figure out how we can be resilient and take care of ourselves. We've done that over the years because we have such great community, and I think the time is now to continue that community but expand in how we support each other by supporting ourselves. I'm sure you'll hear a lot of really great things from folks here. One thing I would ask is every year around October, if this is a subject that's really important to you, please contact myself and our 2 other council members and say that emergency management is really important for our county and that we need to fund it. I fight every year to get funding for Brendan because I think and for Dave, so that we can have someone here in Orcas, and it's really important that we do that. We're all here together to work together, but we're very lucky to have Brendan Cowan here. When he's not working for the county, he is a FEMA response expert. So anytime you see a disaster somewhere around the country, Brendan is usually there immediately, or Dave as well, setting up command posts, working with idiots like myself so we don't mess up anything. So the first thing I was told by my buddy here, Brendan, was, Rick, when there's a disaster, we'll call you, don't call us. So anyway, thank you for your support behind this important subject. We're really fortunate to have Brendan and his team and everyone here. I'd like to mention also that we have great support from Rock Island. So they're not mentioned up here, but I think Rock Island and Opalco are great infrastructure partners. I was in DC the last couple days trying to find infrastructure money. And we're very fortunate. Every county that I talked to didn't have the power and fiber connectivity that we do. So I think we all should be proud of our community for bringing this stuff here and for the leaders here that are helping develop our technology and to support us all. Brendan?
Thank you, Rick, and again, thanks Natalie for putting so much into this. I know it was a lot of work. Appreciate it. So my name, like Rick said, is Brendan Cowan. I am the Department of Emergency Management Director for the county and the town of Friday Harbor. That sounds very grandiose. It's important to keep in mind that myself and Dave Halloran, Dave, stand up, who works with me. Between the 2 of us, we equal 1 full-time position working for the county. So we're both kind of spread thin, working part-time. I work mostly over on San Juan. Dave is here on Orcas at the Senior Center. So use him as a resource for sure, and we'll talk more about how to access us. You know, Dave and I think we started doing this maybe 13 or 14 years ago for the county, so we've been doing this for a long time. We've been working together for a long time, and I really feel lucky that he and I have that partnership, and we get to work in such a wonderful place. It's such a great community. Both Dave and I work at times when we're not doing the work here for FEMA, like Rick said, and we go off and we do some wildland fire work and some other things. Over the course of the years, Dave and I, we spent time down in Louisiana after Katrina. We worked the Oso mudslide for Snohomish County, floods in Skagit, fires in Okanagan. Dave spent most of his fall in Puerto Rico. I spent most of my fall in Houston. I just got back a week ago from Santa Barbara County, working down there where they just had a big mudslide after a big fire. So I like to think that Dave and I have a pretty good balance of being part of the island community, but also seeing what happens in other communities around the country after big disasters. And we like to bring that knowledge back here and to really apply it to what we do here. Now when I started doing this job and I spoke to community groups, I was big on like, I'm going to scare the pants off these folks. I'm going to motivate them to do things, and we're going to really get things going in the islands. And sometimes I still do that, and I think that could be a useful motivational technique at times. But I kind of feel like in this day and age, we're living in a culture of some degree of fear and anxiety about all sorts of things. So what I find nowadays is that I spend more time trying to talk people off the edge rather than pushing them up to the edge. So probably what you'll hear from me tonight is a little bit of both. But what I want to do is just start by congratulating you all on choosing a place to live, which is a very smart decision for those who are worried about natural disasters. We don't have tornadoes. We don't have hurricanes. Great move. Both of those are really bad disasters and cause a lot of problems. You know, we don't have river flooding. Also, great move, river floods, probably the most common and destructive disaster that we see across the country on an annual basis. But there are some things we do think about and worry about, right? So what are some of the things that we think about here in the islands? Raise your hands and shout them out. Give me a fire, earthquake, what else? Cascadia, tsunami, power outage, oil spill, trees falling, that happens. Volcano's an issue a little bit, sure. So, yeah, right. It would never happen that we would have a communications infrastructure failure in San Juan County. That would be impossible. So yeah, I mean, I heard a lot of the things that Dave and I spend most of our time planning for and thinking about, right? Earthquake, tsunami, windstorm, winter storm, a little bit of volcano. For the most part, the winds blow all the ash east, but there's some way that volcanoes will certainly impact us and that they impact Skagit County and Whatcom County to a large degree, and obviously that's our connection with the rest of the world. But there's, amidst that, right, and of all of those, in my mind, earthquake is the most significant. That's the one that's going to cause us the most challenges here in the islands, and so I'm going to start with that. There are really two scenarios we look at. Someone said Cascadia earthquake, and that's the, if you read the New Yorker article, right, that's the big one that we talk about, the full rip, 9.0, up and down the west coast. That's a major event. It's major because it causes significant impacts here, but it also causes significant impacts lots of other places, meaning that resources go to those other places, perhaps before they get here. There are also lots of faults running through the Northwest all over the place. There's something called the Devil's Mountain Fault that runs right through the north end of Whidbey Island, right near the south end of Lopez, San Juan, and over towards Victoria. That fault is capable of a 7.0 quake. That quake will cause more infrastructure damage in the islands than the Cascadia quake, but it's a more localized quake, so the good news with that might be that we get more resource help, right? It's a more limited event. But really, earthquakes are the things that we probably should be thinking about the most, even though they might be happening the least. Because if we're prepared for an earthquake, we're kind of prepared pretty well for a lot of the other things that are prone to happen. So I'm going to hit you with some good news. We've gotten a little scary, so we're going to dial it back. Some good news. All right, earthquake. Bedrock is really good in earthquakes. It's a good thing to be building on, standing on, living on bedrock during an earthquake. Is there a lot of bedrock in the islands? Absolutely. You can go online and you can look up the shake susceptibility map, the liquefaction maps on the Washington Department of Natural Resources website for the county. And you'll see that there are very few places in the county that are high risk. Now, if you go over to Skagit County, where much of that county is on loosely consolidated river sediment, there's much more high risk, okay? So for the most part, I don't worry about massive numbers of buildings in San Juan County falling down after the earthquake. Because in addition to bedrock being good, wood frame single-family construction tends to do pretty well. Now, Jason from the planning department is going to talk a little bit about retrofitting older buildings and how to get a sense of whether your house is in fact going to do, how it's going to do during a quake. But for the most part, wood is flexible, it bends, wood on bedrock is really good. Earthquakes here, I think our main problems after that quake are going to be, we're going to be cut off, we're going to be without power, we're not going to have food supply coming in on a regular basis, the ferries may be disrupted, we're going to be doing without a lot of the things that we take for granted as part of everyday lives here in the islands. And it'll really remind us of how brittle our infrastructure is in the islands. It's easy in regular times to kind of feel like we're just part of the mainland world because it's relatively easy getting back and forth and moving things around. But when that goes away, all of a sudden we end up in a very remote, rural wilderness setting. And that's what we'd be expecting after the earthquake. So we're going to talk a little bit about preparedness. So good news for quakes. I think bedrock is good. Wood frame buildings are good. Tsunamis. We've got outside, if you walk out this door and go to the left on the bulletin board, there's some tsunami inundation maps for the whole county and for Orcas in particular. Take a look at them. It's not terribly worrisome unless you happen to be sitting at Crescent Beach. And then it is very worrisome. There's a little bit of an issue right on the water here in East Sound. But other than that, there are just a handful of places over at Rosario. A couple other spots pop up as problem areas. But for the most part, we don't expect massive inundation of the shoreline of Orcas Island or really any of the other islands after the big quake. And this kind of relates, does anyone remember about a month ago we had like a tsunami warning? There was that quake up in Alaska, it was a big deal. I don't worry about distant source earthquakes. I get asked all the time, where are tsunami warning sirens, okay? Our tsunami warning siren is that you just felt the biggest earthquake you've ever felt in your entire life. You were shaking, you couldn't stand up, you fell over on the ground, things fell off the shelves. That's your sign that if you're on the beach, you're near the water, you should turn to head to high ground. And unlike the outer coast, Grays Harbor, right out that way, where high ground can be a long way away, there's nowhere in the islands where high ground is a long ways away. So we don't have enough time to talk through all of this here tonight, but I would encourage you to go to all our propaganda, which I'll talk about, has our website address, and if you take our domain name /tsunami, it'll take you to a whole frequently asked question that talks through a lot of this. But there's good news on the tsunami front for the islands, okay? Wildfire is another thing I hear a lot about. Wildfires have been in the news. And make no mistake, fire is an issue here in the summertime. It does get dry. We need to be extremely thoughtful about anything we're doing that could potentially be a source of fire, right? We need to be thoughtful about how we maintain our houses and our gutters and our landscape around our property. But also recognize that we are not Eastern Washington. We are not Southern California. We are blessed in that we live in an environment where any weather that comes here has to come over water. So while it may be dry, while we may not be getting a lot of rain, while the temperatures may be warmer than normal in the summertime, and things definitely dry out, the relative humidity of our air very rarely gets to a point where it's so dry that we really see fuel moisture in vegetation getting to the point where it's critical fire danger. Now that doesn't mean we don't need to be careful, and Chief Williams from the fire department is going to talk a little bit about what they do, and they're certainly a resource to help people talk through what sort of things they can be doing at home to better prepare. But I'm getting phone calls on a regular basis from people who are literally not sleeping at night due to concern about the fire danger. And my message to them is really, fire is an issue. When those weather events happen where we really need to be careful and aware, we have a good handle of when those are, and we'll let people know. We call it a red flag warning. They don't happen every summer, but they do happen on occasion, and we just all need to be really thoughtful. And happy to talk to people more about this, but again, we are not in the worst case scenario of Western North America for fire danger. There's some good news out there so long as we're taking prudent steps. And that's really where I'm going to go with this, is prudent steps, right? One of the things that I love about going and traveling around the country and visiting places that have been impacted by disaster is I find the work fulfilling, but it also lets me see people and communities at their best, okay? Nobody wants a disaster to happen in their community, and when there are disasters, when people lose their lives, that's tragic, and we don't wish that on anyone or any place. But for every person who loses their life in a disaster, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are impacted. And those people might lose property, or they might just have their lives inconvenienced or disrupted in some way, sometimes significant, sometimes more minor. Almost universally, what I see when I'm in these communities is people are thriving. Communities are coming together. People are taking care of each other. People are finding a mission. They are enjoying what they're doing and helping people get back on their feet. Disasters can be wonderful opportunities for groups of people to really rise to the occasion. And as all of you know, as islanders, the islands will excel in that moment. So my message for preparedness is, yeah, we want to make sure you have food, we want to make sure you have water, we want to make sure you do all these things so you can take care of yourself. But really my message is, if you're not able to take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of your community. And all of you are here today because you care about your community. That's part of why you're here. And so prepare not just for yourself and your family, but prepare for your overall island and being available to help that island. Because I guarantee when that earthquake happens, every single one of you are going to derive meaning from your ability to help. So what I like to say to folks is, if you're not prepared, you're counting on someone else to take care of you. And we don't want that to be the case, right? We don't want to be the people who are rolling up our sleeves and getting to work. Now, I think I'm limited to 10 or 15 minutes, so I can't go into too much detail. In case you haven't noticed, I can totally nerd out on this, and I can probably talk to you for 2 hours. But what I want to do is just tell you a little bit about some of the resources I have at the front table out in the lobby. I'm a big believer in the fact that government in general does a terrible job of public education. We hand someone a 30-page flyer and we say, here, read this, now you'll know everything you need to know about emergency preparedness. And the only people who ever read those are people who probably are already prepared and are really interested in this stuff. So what we've tried to do is kind of make our things as simple as possible. You'll see a yellow flyer, it says preparation calendar. What we've tried to do is break it out into 12 months. Every one of these little boxes has a few things that you should just run through every month. Put this on your refrigerator where you can see it. A lot of you have probably already done or already have the majority of things on here. Circle the ones you don't, check it off, and at the end of the year, you'll be ready to be on your own. How long do we want you to be on your own for? Forget 72 hours. After 72 hours, we're only going to even wrap our heads around what the problem is. And as someone who works in FEMA, figuring out how to move commodities and supplies to places after disaster, I can tell you, there's one thing we learned for sure this fall. Don't count on FEMA to be coming in 72 hours. And that's no knock on FEMA. That's just the reality of the scenario, especially after a big earthquake. And especially here in San Juan County, where, let's face it, when Portland and Vancouver and Seattle and San Francisco are all dealing with major impacts from a massive earthquake, no one is going to be thinking, what about those little islands up there? What do those guys need? So our advice now, while it used to be 72 hours, is now 2 weeks. You should all be able to be on your own, food, water, keep yourself warm, fed, and happy for a minimum of 2 weeks. Now that's a big lift. That's a lot. How many of you think right now, 2 weeks, no problem? All right, those of you who don't have your hand, wait, keep your hands up. Those of you who don't have your hands up, look around and find someone you know who has their hand in the air. Because they are now, and not because you're going to go to their house and eat their food, but because they are going to help you figure out what you need to do to get ready for 2 weeks. Okay? It's really important. All the things we're going to talk to you tonight, this business of being self-sufficient for 2 weeks is the single most important thing you can do. And a lot of our work here in emergency management is trying to get the islands to maintain the way of thinking that we've had for centuries, right? You take care of each other, you understand who your neighbors are, you're self-reliant, you use common sense, and you understand that when you choose to live on an island that's a minimum of a 1-hour boat ride from the rest of the world, you're making a decision to take care of yourself. And that's a really big piece of this. So, yeah, right, do I care about this? Just a little bit. Second flyer, all right? Really, I've taken everything you need to know to start, and we've boiled it down to 2 pieces of paper that equal 1 8.5 by 11. Thank you. All right, neighborhood preparation. Here's what I want you to do. Many of you live in neighborhoods. Some of you live in neighborhoods where people like to get together and socialize and have potlucks and talk about things. Others of you live in neighborhoods where people just to get together once a year to fight about what road dues are. But no matter what kind of neighborhood you live in, you can organize a little bit in terms of helping each other after disaster. And what we've done here is we've tried to break neighborhood preparedness down into really simple things that even neighborhoods where no one gets along can figure out how to take care of each other, okay? And if you do this and you say, that was easy, we're ready for the next thing, Dave and I are a resource to help you get to that place. They're neighborhoods that have gone far beyond what we suggest as a starting point. But every collection of people in the islands needs to be aware of who's living around them, who has resources, who's liable to need help, where are you going to meet after the earthquake, so you can like tack up notes like, Brennan's got a chainsaw and willing to help people cut down trees, so-and-so needs help, she hasn't been able to get out of her house yet and she's short on water. Right? Passing that kind of information back and forth is really, really critical. I always get asked, like, what's the plan, right? And there is a plan. There's something called the County Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. We talk about roles and responsibilities of official resources. But for the general public, the most important thing to know is that your neighborhood fire stations that are scattered across the island, they become community rallying points, okay, after a disaster. They're equipped with some basic infrastructure so we can use amateur radio to pass information back and forth. But don't expect that if there's an earthquake and you run over to the fire station in the first hour, there's going to be a perfectly designed system there to meet your every need, right? Because remember, you're fine being on your own for 2 weeks. And as Chief Williams will talk about, government and emergency responders are going to be completely overwhelmed. And our first mission early on is simply going to be getting a sense of the scope of the problem. But eventually those fire stations will become absolute hotbeds of activity. And I see this over and over again on disasters all the time, where 99% of the work in helping these island communities recover after a big event is going to be done by you all. My main job is not to get in the way, to support you as much as I can, and to try to encourage a coordinated, unified response, rather than everyone running in different directions and doing their own thing, all with the very best of intentions, but in the end, sometimes complicating things, okay? One more quick thing. This is a resource you can use on, depending on how your day's going, in addition to after the earthquake. We got a stack of these out front. One of the things the fire department's going to do, they're going to drive around and do a windshield survey, try to get a sense of where the needs are. If you need help, help, right? If everything's A-okay, put this out at the end of your driveway so no one actually has to go down to your house. This is Tyvek, it's waterproof, it's indestructible, and sometimes if you're just having a bad day, just put that out there. We try to make this fun, so we have some stickers for the kids of goofy things. Take those, put them up wherever you like. And really, Dave and I are around. We're going to be here to answer questions. We're going to do a Q&A at the end. All of our material has contact info on it, so just feel free to reach out to us. We come and talk to neighborhoods, we'll talk to businesses, we'll help nonprofits figure out what their role is in a disaster. So that is Disaster 101 in like a very small nutshell, but I really appreciate you all coming up and showing up to talk this evening. I look forward to your questions, and with no further ado, I'm going to pass it on to your very outstandingly welcome Chief Williams from the Fire Department.
So Brendan is a hard man to follow, but he covered almost everything, so this might be kind of easy for me. What I wanted to talk about tonight is your fire department and how normal operations work for the fire department on a day-to-day basis, so that you have a concept of what we do, and then that will also hopefully give you a concept of what will happen in a large-scale emergency. So we all know the shape of the island. We've got 7 stations on the island. We have our main headquarters here in East Sound over by the airport, and then we have 3 fire stations on each leg of the island. The only station that's manned 24/7 is the headquarters here in East Sound. The other stations are there mostly to house apparatus and equipment. So we've got fire trucks, an ambulance, different things that we need staged out on the outskirts of the island for us to respond to get. As far as manpower, we have 2 paid operational staff at the headquarters to respond to calls during the day. And then the large bulk of our workforce are the volunteers that are in your community. And they do an absolutely amazing job. You guys are very lucky. I think the whole county is. We have an excellent workforce of volunteers. But they're just like you. You know, in an emergency, on a large-scale emergency, they're going to have families that they need to worry about. There's going to be logistic problems for them, and then they're going to have to break away from that in order to come to the fire station, get organized, and then go back out into the community. We're getting into a situation where we're getting a lot of calls throughout the year, and we're getting multiple calls. So we have a paramedic and an EMT at the station, and then other volunteers who are We have different disciplines, fire and EMS. So we might have a small group respond from the station to a 911 call out in Doe Bay. They'll be there, they'll be treating the patient, and the next thing you know, we get a 911 call out in Deer Harbor. And as most of you know, it takes 45 minutes to an hour to get from one end of the island to the other. So we have the one paramedic on duty. If he's out with this patient in Doe Bay and can break away, it's going to be a long time before that individual can make it to the other side of the island. If this patient in Doe Bay is critical enough to where that paramedic has to stay in order to continue with medications or other life-saving techniques, then you have the EMTs who are working to stabilize this patient. And if this person needs medications or those more advanced procedures, then as a fire department, you can see that in just a normal day-to-day operation, we're kind of tapped with resources, and then we have to figure out how to get those two patients into a situation which may mean bringing both of them into East Sound while we have the flight crews en route so that that one paramedic can bounce between the ambulances and help stabilize both patients. If we have an earthquake or some other big event, we're going to do the best we can to triage the calls, and like Brendan said, we're going to rely on you to support yourselves and support your neighbors. Communications. So fortunately we have Brendan and Dave who have great experience, and the fire station is going to become the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, in a big event. So I'm just going to use earthquake as our big event. We have others, but we'll just talk about or use earthquakes. So something happens and there's power outages, there's other things going on, we're going to mobilize the fire station and set up incident command. And that's going to be our way to communicate. It's going to be our way to communicate with Dave and Brendan, and call for resources, call the power company, Rock Island, other people who help support us and you, and start trying to develop a system post-event in order to provide the best framework for handling the emergency. And having a flood of people coming to the fire station and asking about different things can be good and bad. It can be overwhelming for both you and us if it's not organized. And so that's going to be another part that we have to play with, is not only our internal organization, but how to organize the community. And so like Brendan said, immediately after an emergency, we're going to be doing the best we can to create that framework. And then once we get organized, then we're going to be able to reach out, man the fire stations, start sending crews around the island and doing welfare checks. But we've got about 10 staff people at the station and 70 volunteers, and a population that could fluctuate anywhere from 3,500 to 10,000, depending on the time of year that the incident happens. So I look around, with topics like this, and it's great to see the crowd that we have here, and that 2 weeks of preparation, that knowledge of I'm going to need food, water, fuel, and the one thing that we sometimes forget are medications. If you're on medications, plan ahead for that. It's hard enough living on an island with a medical emergency with no ER, let alone having that same scenario happen after an earthquake. So, all right. Well, I think Brendan did a great job covering most of what I needed to cover, and I'll be around for questions, so I'll pass it on.
Obviously, we're covering a lot of this at the 10,000 or the 30,000 foot level, right? There's going to be some opportunity after all the speakers to come back and ask questions. So if some of you are saying, well, what about this, or Brendan didn't explain this in any detail, don't be shy about coming back later, and we'll try to fill in some of the gaps. I'd like to introduce now Jason Hensel from the San Juan County Building Department. He's here to talk a bit about building safety, retrofitting, and kind of how to make sure that your house is ready to go through that earthquake. So thank you, Jason.
Thank you. I'm your friendly neighborhood building inspector. If you don't know me already, my name is Jason Hensel, and I'm stationed here on Orcas, but I cover all the outer islands as well as Lopez, Shaw, center indicator, Blakely obstruction, and all the fun little nooks and crannies and islands that we have. I've been asked to talk just a little bit about earthquakes and how they relate to your home, and most importantly, is your home ready for an earthquake? That's really, like they said, mostly what's going to happen in the islands as far as disasters go and on a grand scale. One thing, oh thanks, I forgot about that. One thing that we often don't think about that I'm really related to is how building codes change over time. And one thing that's really interesting is homes get built, they get lived in, they get destroyed. We often look at them and say, did this really work? Is this a good way to build a home? You hear the fairy tale about the wolf and the big bad wolf and the three little piggies, and which house that they built in that lasted. And in some cases, wood's better. In some cases, concrete might be better or something else. But I have some couple slides that I'll show you. We'll get into that in a minute. But what we're going to do is just first get into, let's see if this is on. Get an idea of how much of danger we're in this area. We all live on the ring of fire, so to speak, and there's some earthquakes in our area. You can see, obviously, the West Coast is a huge danger for earthquakes. It's very important to be at least aware that it can happen anywhere. But in this area, there's a high danger for that. In our area, we're categorized as D or D1 or D2, which is very high hazard as far as the building code is concerned. When we look at homes in Oklahoma or Nebraska, they might have a wind event like a tornado, but earthquakes never happen out there. There's a couple faults that Brendan spoke about specifically that are close by. Whidbey Island is probably going to be the closest one. And they can shape the area that's real close to us. Everybody who lives here might remember the Nisqually one in 2001 that did quite a bit of damage. And some of these maps will show kind of why that's happening. The earth's cracked in those areas. It creates a huge danger. Obviously, we have some beautiful mountains, and this is a reason why. The plates are moving, obviously. So it gives you an idea that this is, well, there's Mount Baker right there. This was recent earthquake activity. There's a DNR website that lets you check this stuff, and I did this just about a couple days ago. And there were 83 earthquakes within the last 2 weeks. And most people don't really think about it, but they're happening all the time. The yellow dots are kind of everywhere from Seattle down to the Tri-Cities and Portland. But we had one near Roach Harbor just about 3 weeks ago. I don't know if anybody felt that one, but it's a small one. And then there's some other stuff that's happening offshore. You never know when those are going to let loose and give us a big wave. This is just a category that lets you know how big an earthquake is. Kind of gives you an idea. It's an exponential scale, so it's not like 1 + 1 is 2. It's holy crap, this is a 6 or a 7. Next thing you know, your house is shaking pretty bad. So the one thing about the building codes, when the earthquakes in California happened, they had some pretty severe damage, and they decided to look at the aftermath of those earthquakes and see if they could design the building codes a little bit different to see if they could build homes a little better. So particularly Loma Prieta in '89, Northridge in '94, and then of course ours in 2001. Those were pretty good earthquakes. And what we realized is homes that were built before 1985 just weren't cutting mustard. The homes were just falling apart. They were attached to the foundations correctly. The homes themselves did okay. You can imagine just a big block falling over. That doesn't look like it's going to cause a lot of damage, but it does. And so what they did is they redesigned the earthquake codes to help with that structural part and say, let's re-examine this and see if we can get it stronger. Some of the key forces that happen in an earthquake on a home, obviously your house, if it slides off, it's not good. Racking, it's just a little bit of falling over, but again, it's still not an optimum situation. And of course, overturning when you have a pretty severe event. You can see here that the house is still square. It's just not sitting on the foundation anymore. This is a good example of sliding just rough. And so we've decided, let's just add some extra equipment, some extra hardware to see if we can get this house attached a little better. This is a wind event, so either a tornado or hurricane of some kind, but you can see I got a big box, but it's not where I used to live. I have to change the address on this. And then racking when your house moves side to side and it might still be attached, but it's going to damage it still pretty significantly. This happens quite a bit. I don't know if you can see this one. This one's for rent, $10 a month. But one of the key things that our department's gearing up for, and we're training some of the newer inspectors, is if an earthquake happens and we start to deal with the aftermath, and we can go out there and look at homes and try and give them an idea if it's safe to enter the home, is it safe to live in it, or should you stay out of it completely? And so that's one of the things that we want to try and convey to the public is, let's maybe take a look at the home that you're living in, and if it was built before '85, for example, let's take a look at it, see if we can improve it a little bit. This one's California again. Wouldn't want to clean that garage. So again, we talk about the different types of material that people use to build homes, and luckily in the Pacific Northwest, obviously we have lots of great wood. So homes tend to be made out of wood. People often try interesting materials like straw bale, which is pretty interesting by itself. And then obviously masonry or concrete. For the seismic activity that we expect in this area, wood frame homes are wonderfully built. They survive earthquakes rather well. So that's something that's really to our benefit in this area. As far as retrofitting goes, what we ask that people do is just take a peek in their crawl space. You know, are your cripple walls firmly attached to your foundation? Is your floor attached to your cripple wall, and so on? And so what we've come up with is just some basic diagrams of ways for people to improve the survivability of your structure. You know, make sure that it doesn't get as damaged as it might have been had you not done it. And then one thing to think about on a monetary level is that oftentimes hazard insurance companies will offer a break or a benefit of some kind if you do seismically retrofit your home. So get in contact with your insurance company. So one of the things that people often will do is just add some of these extra pieces of hardware. And I brought up just a couple samples, kind of give people an idea of what they're doing. But you know, these big plates, you know, once you drill them to the concrete and attach them to the sill plate on your house, they'll do wonders to maybe keep it on the foundation if we did have a shaker. Oftentimes they'll add some retrofit anchor bolts or some other plates and so on. And they've got a diagram of kind of what we expect to see when people do that when they retrofit their home. And again, just the foundation is typically the weakest point in structure. Oftentimes people nowadays like to have a view of the water, of course, and so they're building these steel frames or glass and concrete homes. And they're going to break when the earth starts shaking. But you can do what you can to see what you can to help your home survive that and help you survive it. If you've got to live in your home for 2 weeks, you want to live in the one that's falling apart or the one that's still standing. So that just gives you just an overview of kind of what we're doing. Many occasions you're going to have to talk to an engineer if you've got a unique or custom shaped home. But for the most part, we have some basics that we can go through. If you do have questions, let us know. We can kind of help guide you through the process if you're interested in doing a retrofit on your home. And then we'll just go through this last little bit. We have some stuff on our website. It's sanjuanco.com. And then just take a peek at your own home. I suggest that. And if you do have questions, just give us a call. We'll help you out. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Jason, I think your office is in the senior center here in Orcas, is that right?
Yes.
People need to track you down. You know, when I go around and work in disasters, there's always like the emergency response phase, and that actually, relatively speaking, is over pretty quickly. And then there's a long recovery phase that happens, which is really when communities are getting back on their feet. And there are a few themes that you see over and over again on disasters, and it really doesn't matter what the disaster is. And the more challenged a community was before the disaster in relation to these things, the harder it is after the disaster. And there are things like housing, right? Is that a challenge in the islands? Yes. Would it be a bigger challenge after an earthquake where a lot of houses might not be inhabitable? You betcha, right? Solid waste and debris disposal. We've done modeling on some of the earthquakes, and we could potentially, in some of the quakes that we're looking at, have 1 year's worth of solid waste and debris generated from that one earthquake for the whole county. Right, so all of a sudden we've got a massive solid waste, and this is not a county where we just have a dump where we take it to, but somehow we have to figure out how to get all that off the island. And something else that we always deal with over and over again after disasters are utilities, and in particular power. If you have a utility that serves your community, that is tied to your community and cares about your community, and the people who run that utility are in the community, you're much better off than you were in a place where you're being served by a large corporate organization that doesn't necessarily understand who it's serving and all the nooks and crannies. And so that's sort of my segue to our next speaker, Russell and Jay from Opalco, who are here to talk about some of the work they do and a little bit about disaster preparedness on the power front. So thanks to these guys for
My name's Jay, and I'll introduce Russell in a minute. I'm just going to give you a quick back of the motorcycle ride through Rome when you mentioned it's good to understand the scope of a problem and you're doing triage and that sort of thing. We're going to just take a quick look at some things that are good to know about your energy and help you think about how to solve a problem when it comes up. One of the things Russell's going to talk about in a minute, it's good to know what kind of disaster you're in. Did it happen in summer or winter? Mainland, county, island, town? And each of these has different ways to think about it. How do we use, to understand the problem, let's take a look at how we use energy in San Juan County. This is just quick stuff. We can handle your questions later if you want to get into the details. One of the first things that's really important to know is that we use more energy in the winter than in the summer, double. Okay, so if a disaster happens here, you have a different situation than here. And you'll notice that most of the outages that happen routinely in the county happen mostly in the winter, storms and so forth, even though 87% roughly of our distribution is buried, transmission is not. High voltages require aerial transmission, and so that has more exposure to tree fall and so forth. And the trees are getting taller and older in the county, and so you have more frequency of outages, the trees that hit transmission lines. So it's good to know our power doubles in the winter, and so think of that as power gets more important in the winter to stay comfortable and so forth. And here's how most people in the county use their energy. Over half of it is for driving, typically gasoline and diesel, although electric vehicle forms of transportation are increasing last year by 65%. So maybe you're seeing more and more electric vehicles around. And that's because they're about 4.5 times more energy efficient than fossil fuel vehicles. So if you have an outage, you will be using 4.5 times less energy, or you need to bring in 4.5 times less energy to the county in an electric world. The 80%, so driving and space heating and water heating is 80% of the typical energy use of a house. And the thing to know about driving and space heating and water heating is it's mostly, by 2030 will be electric. There's this thing that's happening in the nation, the electrification of transportation and heating to move away from fossil fuels towards low carbon fuels. And electricity is generally, especially here in the Northwest, much lower carbon than fossil fuels. Most people heat with electricity, about 80% for water heating, about 75% for space heating. A lot of this is turning to heat pumps, which again are about 4.5 times more efficient than fossil fuel heating. So your bills will go down, and the amount of energy you need to supply from a diesel, let's say a gasoline generator during an outage is a lot less. So that's that. And then how do we supply our energy? So you saw how we use it. How we supply it is mostly from Bonneville Power, about 200 million kWh per year. And increasingly, and Palco invests a lot in energy efficiency, so increasingly that efficiency is helping us use less energy than we would normally need. And we're also generating some energy locally. And that is increasing. Perhaps how many people here have heard about community solar coming? Good. Maybe maybe a quarter of the room. So Opalco's building these large community arrays. The first one's on Decatur Island, at the substation where the energy comes in from the mainland, and we're building a 500 kW array this year, and then a second 500 kW array next year. So right there, you're increasing the amount of local energy in the county by 56%. But solar, you know, winter and summer, solar has its issues. Our load doubles in the winter, but our sun goes down. So we not only don't have sun at night, but we don't have sun for about 1/5 of the sun in the wintertime. So solar can't be a complete solution for energy. If a disaster happened in the wintertime, other things need to happen. And so typically what you're seeing is BPA energy costs are rising, solar, wind, and tidal costs are falling. And we expect somewhere around mid-2020s, mid-20, what should I say? Let's say 2025, for the price, if you take a look at BPA's upward increase and the falling cost of things like solar, wind, and tidal, we expect somewhere about 2025 for commercial scale solar to be cheaper than BPA, and then a little bit later for things like tidal. Tidal can supply energy year-round, and so we're pretty excited about that one. How do we increase energy resilience? And this is where we're going to start turning things over to Russell. The thing to know, I mentioned the Decatur Island project. That's right here. That's a 500 kW array. We're also including a battery energy storage system, a 500 kilowatt battery that can store energy for 2 megawatt hours. And that is at this substation, but this combination becomes a kind of a blueprint for supplying resilient energy, mostly at town centers initially. Again, we're not quite at grid parity, so it's not necessarily the cheapest thing to do, but anytime you have an outage, if you can keep your economic centers energized, you can help make good portions of the county more resilient. So you'll see future microgrids developing once we've gotten through the Decatur Island trials. Department of Energy is working with us on that to help us measure just how effective the microgrids are. So we mentioned the wind outages, and I'm going to turn it over to Russell at this point. Here's our feed from Bonneville Power Administration. And when you have those tree falls on Shaw, that knocks our whole island out. But what you're going to see is over time, we're going to have more and more alternate paths for energy so that energy can supply the island in more ways than one. And we're basically transitioning from this radial grid, where maybe this is Orcas, to having several different feeds for the islands around here. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Russell. Thank you.
So I'm Russell Gary. I'm the Manager of Engineering and Operations for Opalco. And just like Jay said, we're going to first talk about what Opalco is going to be trying to do to solve more of a local problem. But it's not going to solve the problem for everyone in your home. And then we'll talk about what you can do on your own. So we're looking into microgrids via this Department of Energy grants. We can study how effective it'll be in the islands. And long-term scope of this is to be able to set up a microgrid like this here in Easttown and work with Brendan and the Emergency Management Department to feed community centers such that when we have a disaster, we might be able to furnish our power locally, intermittently, when it's needed. It's not going to be a long-term weeks of solution. We're talking hours at this point, but just enough to get some things done to help furnish some communications and help contact the world if we're cut off. So we're trying to look into these projects so as we go into the next 20 years to help us out locally, where we can store this energy and then use it when we need it. And then, as Jay talked about here, we're looking into a lot of alternative paths and automatic switching, such that when a Shaw event happens, and that's one thing we're constructing right now in Decatur. We've got a new tap from BPA, a new feed from BPA that'll come from Decatur to Blakely up to Olga, and we've already got the circuitry coming up through Moran State Park here to East Sound, such that we could have an alternative path to feed Orcas and even to Shaw. If something were to happen on Shaw or the north end of Lopez or anywhere here on Orcas, we can start dividing up our system, possibly doing it automatically to minimize your inconvenience, and then to help our crews concentrate where the work needs to be done. So one reminder, we are a small company. We have 50 people, and we have a large office here. We consider it, but there's only 5 crewmen that work out of this office. That's not a lot of people to handle the outage. No different than our fire chief was telling us that we just don't have a lot of triage that we can handle at once. We take care of the most dangerous situation first, and then we handle medical emergencies. And so that's one thing I would tell everybody, and tell our EMS crews and things like that. If there are folks that have a dependency on power for medical emergencies, please let us know. Call our number during day hours, and let our member services department know so they can flag your account. Otherwise, our crews don't know that you may be a priority. So when we talk about emergencies on your own, proper installation of a generator is very important. So make sure you have an electrical professional install those generators. We've got a lot of generator installations on the islands that don't have a proper transfer switch. And these things can backfeed onto our system. That's going to overload your generator, and you're going to destroy your piece of equipment and likely not get any use out of it. So that's the most important thing when you have a home generator, if you can afford that, is to install a transfer switch appropriately. Any other points on these? All right.
Quick show of hands. How many of you were in the islands during the windstorms in 89, 90, 91, that era? Handful of folks. How long did you lose power for?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, right? Now, everything Opalco's talking about, what these guys are talking about, it has to do with resiliency, right? And mitigating against future possible events and making our life simpler when those events do occur. Opalco, I've been to trainings with FEMA in DC where we're talking about disaster mitigation. And someone who has no idea who I am talks about these islands off the coast of Washington, who after a series of windstorms decided that they were going to start undergrounding their power lines in order to make us more resilient to windstorm damage so that we don't have outages. I know we've had a few outages this winter, but I don't know if you notice in general when the wind picks up, there are massive power outages around Seattle, the eastern suburbs, on the mainland, and for the most part, our power supply is very reliable. And that is all because of the forethought and work that went into undergrounding those lines more than a couple decades ago now. And believe me, when that started, not everybody thought that was a good idea. But that's kind of a nice little story about what's required to mitigate your own lives for getting ready for the earthquake, right? It takes some work, it's a little bit of a hassle, but once you're done, you feel much better about it, and it simplifies things in the long run. So really, when you think about Opalco, commend them for that work, because it was very, very proactive. It has made a big difference here in the islands. So we're now going to segue from sort of the official agency talk, which is probably a relief to all of you, and really get to what I think is the heart of the issue and the really most important part, and the thing that heartens me to see, which is across the islands now there are a number of sort of spontaneous efforts that are taking place from people who've decided that they want to take an interest in disaster preparedness and emergency response, and are kind of taking it on as a mission within their neighborhood or within their island or community, groups of friends, that sort of thing. And it's certainly something that we're happy to support, but really it's super valuable when people begin hearing similar messages. They don't need to be identical, but similar messages from lots of different areas across the community. And that's really when social change starts to happen, and emergency preparedness just kind of gets woven into the fabric of how we operate. So I'm going to pass off to Nathan Donnelly, who's over from Lopez Island. Nathan's been doing a lot of work over on Lopez, and he came over and did a great talk on San Juan a couple months ago, just about how neighborhoods can organize, some steps people can take to get prepared, and he comes at it from sort of a great, very common sense, practical approach. So thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Brendan. Okay, everybody stop clapping right now. I need you to self-identify. If you can safely do jumping jacks at your home right now, raise your hand. Okay, everybody with your hand up, right? Stand up right now. Right now, right now, right now, right now. Come on, let's go. Up, 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 up. I need you to go anti-clockwise 3 times, as quickly as you can. Quick, 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 quick. Okay, now I need you to answer this math problem. It's very simple. 47 minus 21 plus 13 minus 7. What's the answer? Quick, quick, quick. 47 minus 21 plus 13 minus 7. What's the answer? 32. All right, good job. All right, you can all have a seat. So, I did that because I wanted to drop down out of the 30,000 foot level and into your brain. Okay? When something jarring like that happens, our brain changes dramatically. We have kind of 2 brains. We have the brain that we're used to using every day and the brain that we hardly ever access. Some people call it our reptile brain, but essentially what happens is your left frontal lobe turns off. And that's the part of your brain that does problem solving, figures out math, invents things, addresses a problem in a calm, logical manner, and is what humans are more or less famous for, what separates us from all the other animals out there. And we don't have it when something really jarring happens. What we have is what we've already done and what we already know. You don't get to make up new rules. You don't get to approach a novel situation with a novel solution anymore. So I would like to think that we would all have done better with that math problem had I not had us up running around and doing some stuff that you didn't expect. The answer again was 32. Remember that, okay? You're in training right now, so you will be tested later on. But there are things that you can do. There's a reason I was like barking at you and sounding like a drill sergeant. There's a reason drill sergeants are like that. They're trying to train people to go to a disaster situation and have their wits about them. Everything that we're learning here tonight is going to be completely useless if you don't have access to your brain. So that's kind of, I want to tie this into with what we're doing over on Lopez as far as how we have decided to organize our community, or I don't know if decided is really a way to say it because it's been a very organic thing, but we have a really beautiful resource in the San Juan Islands, and I like to call it potluck culture. And we need to tie into it. It's a super important thing. It's beautiful. It's the reason we all want to live here. You know, it's pretty here. Yeah, it's pretty from Mexico to Alaska. You know, that's not why we really live here. We live here because there's a lot of deep community in this area, and like Brendan was saying, and like other communities I've had the privilege to live in, when things go sideways, you really get to see what kind of a community that you're in. And I tend to think that this one could be operating after a disaster better than just about any place I've ever visited, let alone lived in. So let me go through my notes here, and I operate a business called Reverence Permaculture and Preparation over on Lopez Island, and anybody's welcome to contact me for that. I used to do a lot of wildland fire work. I was a backcountry park ranger. I did search and rescue. I've been through and in a few disasters, evacuated from wildfires from my own home a number of times. It's really interesting to see how your community reacts to hundreds of firefighters coming into an area, like the area turning into a war zone, helicopters overhead, heavy machinery, bulldozers, the ferry system taken over. When things like that happen, it's a little bit otherworldly. And I've lived in a place where that happens every second year because it's really wildfire prone, and it's really neat to see how the community reacts to that as well. They organize, they have history, they saw this fire happen in the 70s, we live in a really gentle place. We have our windstorms, and we don't really experience hot weather. We don't really experience cold weather. We don't really have anything going on here. This is about as gentle a place on the planet that you can live. And because of that, I don't feel like we've gotten the opportunity to train for the very, very significant events that could happen here, such as the 9.0 or the Devil's Mountain 7.0. So we need to do that. It's not so long ago that we were fairly self-sufficient as an island when the population was probably 20% of what it is now. And it's not going to be too hard, I think, to back up and get back into that place. So what do you do when you don't have a brain trying to figure out new things? You revert to what you already know. The only way to already know what you need to know in a given situation is to train for it. Plan, practice, and potluck, okay? The planning and the practicing isn't coming on you to figure out, okay, what would happen if I was without power for a few days or a few weeks? And go through your home. Turn off the power in your house. Have a staycation. Have you ever heard of that before? A staycation, where you, like a lights out staycation? You turn off the power in your house for a 3-day weekend and you live in it. And you figure out if your garage door will open and you can leave the house with your car. Or whether or not your gas stove is going to be great in a power outage will ignite it all. Things like that are really useful to know. You don't want to try and figure that out when you don't have your frontal lobes. And that's a short-term thing, but it's worth knowing that if you have to leave the house all of a sudden, essentially pack for a camping trip, how long does that normally take you? Who goes camping here? It's not like I'm just out unless you're already packed up. Well, that's not the state you want to be in when you've got to do something like that. So you have it done ahead of time. One thing that the brain is actually really good at doing when it's in that state is following very simple, clear directions. Okay? It just, bam. And you, now, with your whole brain, can write out those directions, get things prepared, ready to go. You've got your shoes tied to the bedpost with a flashlight in it, so when that earthquake happens in the middle of the night, you're not scrambling around in broken glass bare feet. You can do that stuff ahead of time, and you can get together with your neighbors and figure out what needs to happen amongst each other for those people who aren't in this room. For the 3,500 to 10,000 people who are on this island, we got about 150, 180 people in this room right now. So some of us didn't show up tonight. That means that all of you, as great a crowd as this is, all of you need to be doing what I'm doing on some level when you get back home. So that's where the potluck part comes in. On Orcas Island on Lopez Island last fall, I was asked to teach a class at the library. About 20 people showed up on disaster preparedness. It was a whole day event, and at the end of it, there was 5 or 6 people that were in one neighborhood that all happened to show up to this same event. They decided to get together afterwards and kind of meet somewhat regularly and talk about, okay, what is our neighborhood going to need? There's an interesting thing on Lopez, and I think it's very true of Orcas. On the macro scale, it's definitely true because you guys are an island of 3 lobes. But kind of like that diagram that was up there for Apalco earlier, when your power gets cut off in one place, there's no back way around. That's kind of how the road systems in the islands tend to be. There's one way in and there's one way out. Lopez is like that almost exclusively. You can only get to one neighborhood, one way in, one way out. There's a big tree across the road, you don't have a chainsaw, that's your place. You're not leaving unless you're going to do it on foot. So if you happen to live in a neighborhood like that, like on Orcas, then bam, you already know who your group of people are to organize with. It's a pretty simple way to do it. That's what has kind of organically happened. We've got a shark reef and Airport Road area, which is actually one of the few places where you can come in and out in 2 different directions. But those people got together and decided and asked me if I would do a little presentation and do something that we do now every single month. I took over the Lopez Grange and got my own key, and we go in there anytime we want, and we pick a subject off of a talk that I gave with Brendan over in Friday Harbor last November, which is just, okay, what are the different things that any household needs to worry about? Power, food, water, shelter, et cetera, et cetera. What's a risk assessment? Da, da, da. So I wrote up about a 10 or 12 page document that goes down all those 17 different items. And now we pick one of those items and we get together as a neighborhood. We're going island-wide this next week. I think the 15th is our next meeting. And we just pick an item. Last month we did water. This month we're doing food. Before that we did networking and communications. And one of us, me usually, Dave got ferried out unfortunately last time, but gives a presentation on the subject, and then we break out into our geographical locations. I'm calling them lobes now instead of neighborhoods, but and we're trying to build a mycelial network of people, a net, okay? FEMA and our county and our other governmental organizations are very good at injecting information, organizing themselves in a very hierarchical manner. It's very useful, it's totally necessary. There's another way that nature likes to, that's kind of very tree-like. Trees tap into a mycelial network of fungus under the ground. Every time you take a step in the forest, you're affecting like 1,000 miles of that mycelial network. That's what I think of as the community, okay? Government grows out of community, community feeds it, it organizes, it's a two-way road, okay? If you cut a hole in a net, you still have a net. There's ways around it, right? Actually, the more holes you cut in a net, the fewer holes there are in the net. Think about that for a second, okay? So forming a network as a community, if something gets cut off, there's ways around it, because you know Joe up the road has another chainsaw, and this guy's got a piece of heavy equipment, and da-da-da-da-da. Getting together and actually having talked about that beforehand rather than trying to figure it out later on is what we're doing on Lopez right now. And it's been a lot of fun. We're going to have our first potluck this next one, but we've been doing tea and all that stuff. And it's growing. We're going to be bumping out to the whole rest of the island this coming week, and all it took was 2 or 3 people saying, hey, let's do this. We have email right now. Let's send out an email and see who shows up. 30 people showed up, okay? So did the fire chief. So did I. So did EMS people. And now we have plans in place. So if a lobe gets cut off, people can put a flag off their mailbox. If the EMS people already know what that color of flag means, somebody's injured, everybody's okay, somebody needs immediate attention, they can drive around without having to go down all of our quarter-mile, driveways and figure out what's going on. So I guess what I'm trying to do here is plant the seed among you guys, as many of you as possible, to say, hey, we do have a cool neighborhood. Why don't we just get together with a monthly potluck or a quarterly potluck, or next time we get together for whatever reason, and hash it out a little bit. I do that document that I referred to earlier, 10 or 12 pages. It will be one of the links that if you signed up to earlier, we can get you onto. The thing is, like Brendan said, we're not going to have FEMA coming to help us. We're going to be helping each other. And we're not necessarily going to be able to do that quite as easily after the fact as we could very easily and actually enjoyably right now. So after we have our little breakout, we break out into our neighborhoods, we get back together, we figure out after our brainstorm, okay, what do we need to do? We give ourselves homework for the coming month, okay? So last time we had water, so now people are at home right now figuring out what their storage options are, whether they have a pond, who's got a filter, who ordered filters for a group bulk order, stuff like that. And we decide what we're going to figure out next month. So that's going to be food. Then we clean up from the potluck, so I don't have to do it all. And figure out if we're going to have another event. There's a lot of maritime stuff on the island, so maybe people who are interested in sailing have a thing where they get together and figure out how they're doing that. How do they keep their boat organized? What do I keep in my car for a 72-hour pack? You know, things like that where you can all meet and do picnics in the summertime. I think that if you guys are able to, especially within your lobes of the island, figure out whether or not you have a Grange building like we do, an old schoolhouse, or just somebody's big neighborhood house, contact the people, and if you're one of those people who owns that place, get an email list together, figure out what your neighborhood is going to do, and then kind of make a regular meeting out of it. It's been a lot of fun over on Lopez, and one last real quick thing here. Everybody who had their hand up earlier, please stand up. What was the answer? 32, all right? So much easier to figure out once we did it once, right? Okay, this is what you want to do with your neighborhood, is just go through it. Make it fun. Don't do it out of fear, because we can't think clearly when we're doing that anyway. But you can all sit down. But make it fun. Make it a community event, because that's what it is. And Brendan's right. When things go weird. I was in an earthquake down in California once, and a party broke out in the grocery store about a half an hour later, because everybody had been through this communal experience. We all had experienced the same thing, which happens so rarely in our lives. And literally a block party broke out. It was an amazing thing. But that sort of thing happens, and I think that if there's a little bit of planning ahead of time, it could have been maybe a caterer or something. I don't know. But get out there and meet your neighbors if you don't know them already, and especially the people who show up in the summertime who are coming here maybe without a clue. Reach out to everybody you can. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nathan. All right, we're just going to jump into the part where I'm really excited for. We've got a selection of odd fellows who are here to talk about a few various little subjects related to disaster preparedness. So, odd fellows, here you go.
Let me speak and give an overview on behalf of the Odd Fellows. We're known for our community service, which I think is going to be important in the case of any disaster. We're also known for parading and drumming, but I don't think those will be very happy unless we need to have some celebrations. Anyway, I lived through the Loma Prieta earthquake. My house was about 3 miles from the epicenter, and I just remember chimneys down all over the county, broken water mains, collapsed houses, and the emergency services were just overwhelmed with what they had to do and limited resources they had to address it. So there's a number of the things we're trying to do. We are all keeping boned up on our first aid capabilities, and Barry is going to talk about that later. We're building a communications network, a VHF communications network. We have an antenna and repeater on the side of Mount Constitution up to Busario area. I think it's about the 1,000-foot level, and we're beginning to use it so that we can communicate between ourselves or among ourselves, actually, without reliance on any external power. We're also looking into things like using filtration systems and building rocket stoves for the long run, in case we're talking about, many weeks having to wait and be on our own. So with that introduction, I'm going to ask Barry Neville to talk about first aid and other things he might care to talk about.
I've never been one to enjoy, but my goodness gracious, look at all you up there. You're all, hello. First of all, I'm very grateful to be here and for this opportunity to share with you what I consider, and a number of the Odd Fellows consider very, very important in planning for disaster or any emergency. After disaster, your survival will hinge on your own skill set. We've heard that over and over here again tonight. A cache of food and water and all the supplies certainly will be helpful. But the real helpful is going to be the knowledge that builds your skill set. And that's what we're talking about tonight. This is especially true when it comes to first aid and CPR. A ton of medical supplies are useless if you don't know how to use them and how to put them to use. We are truly blessed in this community, throughout the county, to have our EMTs, our paramedics, and our first responders. They prove themselves over and over again. They're incredibly valuable. I believe that we're here, pardon me. It's been said that we can live for 30 days without food, or 7 to 10 days without water, maybe 3 minutes without air, or a serious loss of blood, and possibly a lot less time if the heartbeat stops. This is why I believe, and so many other people do as well, that CPR and first aid training is an absolute must first priority, preparing for emergency disaster in that situation. If you've taken CPR in the first aid classes in the past, I'm going to suggest that you re-attend the class, because there's been all kinds of new, very critically valuable information that's come out recently, especially in CPR. Alan Stamerson, are you here? Yeah. You stand up, please. Yeah. Hey. If you don't know Alan, I want you to just pick him out of the crowd here in a little bit. I've had the pleasure of taking this first aid class twice now, and we've had about 30 odd fellows and their wives take the class twice so far, two classes over a year and a half. And he is truly an amazing resource with 40 years experience. And I want to encourage all of us to please take this class. It's critically important.
Where did you teach it?
It's taught at the fire hall every third Saturday.
Yeah, actually, just if you get a hold of 2331.
2331.
They can give you the list of the current classes going on each month.
Okay, just 2331, current classes every month. It's incredibly empowering information. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was something that I've always enjoyed. It's something really quite simple called rocket stoves. Now, the history is that they were originally designed to find a way to build a fire that's very low on smoke and very low consumption of fuel, with very intense heat for cooking. And this was done to help third world countries with smokeless, where the fires were in huts, lots of smoke, lots of diseases, lots of deaths unnecessary. So the rocket stove is really quite simple. They're very easy to build. You have a chamber to supply the fuel. Underneath that fuel supply is a chamber to allow fresh air to come in right underneath the fuel. And then the combustion chamber, which burns very hot. Most of these rocket stoves are well insulated, so they hold the heat quite well. And then, of course, up the chimney. The top of the chimney is your cook spot. Now, I built mine out of 4 cinder blocks, 8 by 8 by 8 cinder blocks, for about $27. And it works really quite well. You can see that drawings on the internet. You can go to Google. The wealth of information on YouTube regarding rocket stoves is invaluable. I know that we all know how to camp and how to build a bonfire, but if we're in a situation where the house is not habitable and you need to cook something and you don't want to be having sparks go everywhere, or it's whatever other circumstances, it's a very simple device to build. You can buy them online on eBay for $60 to $200. They're really quite valuable. Thank you.
Michael Herwig is going to talk about the communication system, and what we're really trying to do here is to be able to interact with each other in the event of a disaster. We're sprinkled all over the island, and if something is going wrong in one particular neighborhood and the help is really needed, we can use this communications network to try to bring that help over to alert the fire department about it.
Thank you. So what we've got is these little mobile radios. I think about 5 or 6 of us have these right now. We can communicate point to point with these without, one of us mentioned that we have a repeater up in Buzeria, which we do. But even if that was gone, we can communicate point to point, for example, from the Odd Fellows Hall over to the fire department. So one of the things we're envisioning is we'll have a whole network of odd guys, and one of us may be over at the fire department, one of us may be at the library. It just depends what, where we might be needed, or where the information is, where they might need to know what resources we have, or we might need to know what needs or resources they have. So I know some people have already talked about this, that there is no plan, because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what disaster we're planning for. We don't know what's going to fall down, what's going to stand up, etc. So we see this as a way where we can communicate what we know, and we can find out what other people know, so that we can coordinate and do whatever happens to need to be done at that time. Another thing we're doing is we're getting some mobile antennas, so we could put an antenna on top of a car, have the same thing, but it would be broadcasting and receiving a little more powerfully. Ultimately, we'd like to have a system probably on the Odd Fellows Hall with a high antenna and a more powerful radio, about 10 times as powerful as this, so that that point-to-point type of communication, could work even more powerfully. Through the repeater, we're already talking, we've heard transmissions from Victoria. We've heard transmissions from Anacortes. As long as we're not trying to go east, because it's a westward facing thing, if that repeater is working, it's amazing, what you can talk to. We've got batteries on that. And by the way, in all this, I'd like to thank Wayne Rankin, because he has set this all up for us. He told us what to buy. He programmed these things. He gave about $5,000 worth of his own equipment to put that repeater up there. There's batteries on that, 2 big deep cycle marine type batteries, so that if the power went out completely and we couldn't charge it up, we probably have a day or two, just depending on how much we have to use it. So that's what we're seeing. We're practicing with these generally once a week, so that again, when our brains are not functioning, our fingers will do the right thing. So that's what we're trying to prepare for. And we'd like to think, as time goes on, that same thing of people doing things once a month and adding more and more and more. As an organization, we'd like to do that too, so that we can be a resource for the community, and we'll be using these to let the community know what we have and find out what the community needs. Thank you.
A couple of points that I've forgotten. We were working with Dave Halloran, and one of the things he really stressed was this need for communications. Another thing is that I've only been an Odd Fellow for about 3 years, and I am just amazed at 2 things. One, the skill set these guys have, and 2, how well we work together. I mean, so there's a task, we just immediately figure out who's good at what and work together very well as a team. Let me introduce one more speaker. That's Eric Morris, who's going to talk about filtration system, particularly Berkey filtration systems for filtering water. I mean, I personally have about 5,000 gallons of my rainwater collection system, but I sure wouldn't want to drink it in an emergency. And this is one way I could.
Who here depends on water? Drinking, cooking, washing, and various other activities? Anyone? Anyone? Well, it looks like we're a pretty well-hydrated bunch, at least today. So, water is everywhere here in the islands. It falls out of the sky. We're surrounded by water. We're blessed on this island with lakes, streams, ponds. Water's everywhere. Yet the water we depend on for our personal use typically comes out of a tap in our kitchen, our bathroom. Water comes out of a pipe, and we take that for granted. We depend on it every day, and it's always there, right? Yet in the event of a big disaster, such as an earthquake, extended power outage, the water may not come out of that tap. What are we going to do? How many of us are prepared to survive without water, just coming unbidden out of the faucet? So some of us asked that question, and we did a little research, looked around at what solutions are available and have been used in other natural disasters around the world. And here's one solution that we found. This is a Berkey water filter. It's a microfiltration system that removes most anything from water. You can run water from a pond or a ditch, scoop up any water after disaster, and run it through this and have perfectly clear, drinkable water. That's the essence of it, really. And I'm not going to get into the science of it too much, but I do have literature. If people want to come up afterwards and get some literature, ask questions about all the wonderful things that Berkey water filter can do and remove from tainted water, that information's here. Now, this is the guts of it. This is the core, and basically, the beauty of this system is that it doesn't require power. It doesn't require pressure. It's just a simple gravity feed system. So the filters are installed in something like this or that, or the super economical model is just a filter in a bucket like this. So you fill the bucket or the top of these containers with dirty water, and it'll drip down, and you'll have clean water in the reservoir at the bottom. And a number of us have been using these for several years, for daily use, just to filter out the chlorine from the e-sound water that we enjoy every day, and it tastes really good. So, in the event of a bigger event, we feel like this is a really great tool to be prepared for extended period of time where the water may not be coming out of our taps. So, again, I have information, and you can go online and just Google Berkey filters, and they're available there. I'm a dealer. I have some of these systems in stock and can sell you an entire system or just the filter itself. And yeah, there'll be one critical element that you'll be good to go with in the event of unexpected situation. So that's the essence of it. I think at this point we're going to go back to Natalie. Next. Oddfellows are done. Do you want to close it up? Okay, Michael's going to wrap it up for us.
Like I said, we're really in the early stages of thinking about this, and we have recommendations. But one thing I haven't mentioned, and we're beginning to talk about, is how we could use the Oddfellows Hall, should it survive. Some kind of staging area, emergency habitation. We've got a big stove down in the gas stove down in the basement. We just repaired or upgraded our septic system. So and there's a dock about 200 yards down the road where food and supplies could be brought in. So, and it's very centrally located. So we're beginning to think about how we might use that as a gathering point for the community. And the fire hall is going to be overwhelmed with other responsibilities. Anyway, why don't we give this to the next set of speakers?
Oh yes, it's very bright up here. I love preparedness and planning except for presentations. So my name is Natalie Manacho. I am co-lead of the Political Action Civic Engagement Group of the Orcas Women's Coalition, also called PACE. And part of what we do are events like this that are beneficial to our community. So I would love to see, I mean, this is an all-dude presentation set. That's not intentional. So let's get some like badass ladies up here next time, please. Come to me if you have some ideas. I do want to do a little plug. Tomorrow we have a really great event called International Women's Day Celebration at the Parish Hall, and that's from 4 to 7. And it's going to be a great time with community members, all genders welcome, childcare will be provided. It's going to be just a really sweet celebration of women and all that we do in the world. I am also, as another feather in my hat, the grocery manager of the Orcas Food Co-op. And part of what we are all about is our local food systems, as well as accessibility to healthy and natural foods. So, you know, we were talking about how 72 hours is kind of like, yeah, right, like we need a lot more supply in our back stock to really be ready for any type of disaster. And we are a very generous culture here, like Nathan was saying, we're a potluck culture, and we want to be benefits to our communities and not liabilities. So getting 2 weeks stock worth of food in our pantry is super, super important. And what the co-op has decided to do to help with that, provide accessibility to healthy natural foods, is to have a co-op disaster preparedness member sale. And that's going to be straight catalog pricing on all UNFI items. And UNFI is our main distributor for all of our non-perishables, as well as dairy and wellness and all those things. And what that means is that you can look in our catalog, which is in store. We have it over on the white hutch by the registers, or we can look online, which I have all the materials up front, so that you can see how to go about that and look at the thousands and thousands and thousands of products that UNFI has. We're not limiting it to just you know, preparedness items. Like if you want to go crazy on shampoo, like you do your thing. So I also want to just say, like normally our UNFI special order pricing is 10% over the catalog price for members, and then it's 20% for everyone else. And we also have membership information at the front there as well. And it's an overwhelming catalog. So what I did on the print collateral on the front is to put just like a list of our most popular value items that you know, really sell well. It's like spaghetti for, you know, and it has the case prices and everything you need to be able to sign up for that. So we have that going for members until Friday, March 23rd. And so that gives us, I believe, 3 Tuesday deliveries. So yeah, place your special orders, get yourself stocked up. If anything, if you feel like you can't make that big investment, just every time you shop, wherever you shop, just take 2 of whatever you're buying and just always be rotating your stock, because perishables are, you know, things that expire, so we need to always keep that in mind. I also wanted to mention, which wasn't mentioned, that we need to remember our pets. You have to remember to get pet food. And we sell some stuff at the co-op, but you know your pet is picky, so you get what you need. I am wondering if Lerner has anything to mention. I know that we have an annual, what was it? What do we have coming up? This is Lerner, our general manager of Orcas.
We didn't plan this, but thanks. Awesome job. That was really well done. Yeah, it is. There's 3 deliveries for the special order, and so catalog pricing, it's pretty awesome. So totally come and order. Our staff can tell you if you come to the store and just, you know, help you out and actually walk you through it if you want help with that. Our annual meeting is this Sunday, I believe March 11th, and it's at the Oddfellows Hall, and as it always is, 5:45 to 7:30. And I also wanted to say that you know, I recognize a ton of co-op members in here. I'm sure most of you are already members. If you're not a member and you're interested in the co-op, you can come. We're not checking membership at the door. So it's just a really, you know, we give a little annual report most of the meeting is going to be dedicated to discussion, table discussions. That's going to be facilitated, and we're talking about our future and kind of what do we do now. We just finished our first profitable year, 2017. Thanks to all of you and our wonderful staff. So it's kind of exciting. That was just our third year, and we're just going up from here. So if you want to come on Sunday, we'd love to have you. And there's going to be some food and just great company and discussion. So thanks.
Thank you. You know, as someone who's been preaching disaster preparedness in the islands for a long time now, this is all very sincerely heartwarming and lovely to see so many people taking an interest in this and all our presenters. So I just want to thank everyone so much for putting so much into this, and hopefully you'll all disperse and become ambassadors for the message that we're all talking about. We're going to do a Q&A. I think we'll give everyone like 90 seconds to make a graceful exit if you need to run out of here and start immediate work on your disaster prep kit. We will not hold it against you. We don't want to keep you here all evening. But for those of you who want to stay, we're going to bring the whole panel up, and we're going to take some time to really answer some questions and have some discussion. So make your graceful exit now. We'll start the Q&A in about a minute.